Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Her Faith Inspires podcast, where we take cultural issues and we tackle them with biblical truth. I have a guest on for you today, and how I found out about this guest was Women in Apologetics posted a new Women in Apologetics to their team. And when they posted something about Kelli's story, and I was like, it was so interesting to me. And immediately I messaged them and I said, hey, I would love to have Kelli on my podcast. Can you guys give me her handle, her Instagram handle, her email, something? And they were like, oh, I'm not even sure if we have Kelli's email address set up yet, but we'll find out and get back to you. That's how fast I jumped on it. They were like still trying to get her email set up. And so Kelli's on the podcast. I mean, we talked and I'm like, I got to have her share. And so I am excited to introduce you to a woman in apologetics from the whole team, Women in Apologetics. And her name is Kelli. So Kelli Johnson, thank you for meeting with us today and being here.
Thank you for the invite. I'm so excited.
Yeah, you just spoke at the Women in Apologetics conference, right?
Yeah, out in California at the beginning of the month. It was such a good time.
Yeah. How was were you nervous or were you, because were like, were you planning this or did they just throw you right in because that was fast?
Yeah, it was so funny because originally I was just going to watch virtually, and then I became part of the team. So I decided to go in person and meet everybody. And then they sent me an email, like it may have been 2 weeks later, asking, hey, we need a speaker. Would you like to fill the role? And I said, sure. Because I had just been praying that I would be willing and able to fulfill whatever need that they had, not realizing that that would be their request. But they were so gracious and encouraging, and it was a really, really wonderful time.
That's awesome. So I'd love to hear more about you and your story and what you do. So can you do that before we get into all the other questions I can't wait to ask you?
Yeah, sure. I am a wife. My husband and I have been married over 16 years, coming up on 17. He's probably the most patient guy you'll ever meet, and he's very encouraging in all of my endeavors. And I'm a mom of three. I have a 15-year-old son, almost 13-year-old daughter, and then my youngest daughter just turned 11. And we are homeschoolers. We've always been homeschoolers, and we're really blessed to be able to do that. And then I think the interesting part has been, before I was a very competitive athlete. I trained MMA and CrossFit and Olympic weightlifting, and I did all of the things. And then I got really, really sick suddenly, and my body just shut down about 7 years ago. And in my mind, I thought, well, we'll figure out what's going on. I'll get better, and life will resume as normal. Kind of doing a lot of things in my own strength. And I haven't gotten better, and the doctors can't figure out what is going on. And so in the meantime, I've had to learn to press into the Lord and rely on his strength most days to get out of bed. And it's just been a really beautiful time of deepening my faith and my walk. And through it, I've been able to write different Bible curriculums and Bible studies to help others who are going through suffering, and to just encourage women and youth groups that we as Christians we never suffer in vain as Christians. And we have this beautiful eternal hope that can fill our lives even amidst the suffering. And so, yeah, so that's kind of how the Lord has really directed my life. It's been very different from how I imagined it or how it used to be, but I don't think I would want it any other way because of just the deepness and richness of my faith now compared to when I could do so many other things in my own strength.
Wow. So you're still battling whatever the illness was. Do you know what it
Yeah,
is? Have you been diagnosed?
no diagnosis. Everything comes back inconclusive. They think they might have a diagnosis, and then those tests will come back inconclusive. And so we just kind of take it day to day. And it really gives new meaning to his mercies are new every morning,
Mhm.
because I never know what the day will bring me. Um, and I had to learn to be okay with that and just trust God's sovereignty and God's plan for my life, no matter what my health looks like.
Yeah. I think, for somebody who like me, I do CrossFit, been doing it for 8 years. And how to say this? I relate so much because you get up and you do your routine and you kind of are in control of your quote unquote health. Like I'm in control of my health because I work out and I know what I'm eating and what I'm putting into my body. And then when your body just does its own thing, you realize like, wait, like I'm not in control. Like life is fragile. I'm not the captain of my own ship. You know what I mean? Like, yes, we have some responsibility over our health with what we eat but then things like that, I feel like throw a wrench into life and it reminds you that cling to the Lord and don't like for me, it would be, I would think to myself, don't always have to be the one to control everything. Even when I
Yeah,
get sick and have to go to the hospital or whatever, like when I had my kids, I'm always very vulnerable because I feel like, wait, who are you? What are you going to do to me? Like, and you know what I mean? Like, I want to know these, let's talk this out, doctor. You know what I mean? And
right,
I don't know. I just feel like that's such a scary thing, but it also seems like it would hit you and wake you up to the idea of like, wow, God knew this was coming and I never did. And that's where the trust comes in, how he's going to take the rest of this of my life if I have to battle this and what that's going to look like. So do you
right.
still do any of that stuff at all or no? Like the workouts and stuff?
No, not really. Every once in a while I will kind of test the waters, but it it can be a humbling
Yeah.
experience when I try. And that's okay. And I'm just grateful for the days I can do something, because there are many days where I can't. And so I learn that um I just don't take it for granted anymore.
Hmm.
It's not just a given that, yes, I can go do this if it's on my schedule.
Yeah.
It's it requires a lot of trust, and it just is, like I said, it really, before, like you said, you just get up and go and do your plan. And most days now, I before I even get out of bed, my first words are to the Lord. Like, okay, Lord, be with me. Help me get up, strengthen me for whatever you have for this day. And and I love that. I It's a very tangible reminder of who is actually in control of my life.
Yeah. Wow. That's really interesting. I love hearing, I don't know, sometimes we just like you're so pretty, your face is on women in apologetics, but nobody truly knows the story behind the person sometimes. And I do remember them. I think that's something that they posted like after you had this situation, like the experience that God has taken you on.
Mm.
And so that's why, I mean, look at the time now, I guess, that you have that you're putting into the ministry, which is a question I wanted to ask you about the conference recently, because you spoke on the truth and the cost to it. And that's the thing, like I'm so excited. I don't want to get ahead of myself because I love that you spoke on that because I love speaking about the attributes of truth and things like that from time to time and making it simple. But I think sometimes people forget there's a cost either way when you don't speak it and when you do, right?
Yeah.
But I don't want to get ahead and I don't want to take away from anything that you have to say about that. So, what is the cost? And is it something Christians should be afraid of? Because when we say cost, I'm like, ugh, like back up. What is that cost? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So I
I
think
think
there's a fear to it.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important question for every person to ask themselves, like, what are they willing to pay? Because I think a lot of times we don't even think about that question, right? It's just, it
Mhm.
kind of hits us over the head when unsuspecting in a many ways, and we're not ready for that. And so, I mean, I teach my kids to ask that question because more and more we see kind of the cultural climate heating up. And I think Westerners, the Western church specifically, but especially here in America, we've been very comfortable in our comfort for a long, long time. And, we forget that we're to be in the world, but not of it. And so when the world tells us this is what you should value, this is what you should celebrate, we kind of get swept up in that current unsuspectingly. When, we are called to be holy because our God is holy. We're to be set apart in a way that when people look at us, they can tell that we're different. And that is always going to cost you something. That is always going to cause you to not fit in. And I think, especially for our young people, fitting in is very important to them, especially with the rise of social media. Or we have the other aspect where we think, well, I'll just kind of stand on this middle ground and pretend that neutrality is kind of my claim. And I said this at the conference, like, neutrality is a lie. It's a lie from the enemy, and it woos us into the kind of this apathetic coma that creates weak souls and weak convictions. And there's no such thing as neutrality. We're either furthering God's kingdom or we're furthering the kingdom of darkness. And so I think as Westerners who maybe haven't experienced intense persecution yet, it is coming. We're just so comfortable, and we think that we're being neutral, but neutrality does not exist in the spiritual realm, especially. And so we need to learn to love the things that God loves and hate the things that God hates. And there has to be a line drawn in the sand for what we will stand on and what we will stand against. And knowing that, I mean, they hated Christ and for what he stood for, and we expect to somehow get out of that. I understand how we got there, but we can't stay in that mentality any longer, because persecution is coming. The comfort of the church, before, society kind of agreed with some of Christianity, and now it's not. And we have to recognize the cultural climate before it hits so that we're prepared. Kind of like, we live in Florida, and you prepare for the storm before the storm hits. You can see it coming, and you shore up your defenses. You get clean water. You cannot do that in the middle of the storm. I think that's why we see a lot of deconversions and people leaving the church, because they're hit with suffering, they're hit with persecution, and they haven't shored up their defenses yet. And they haven't decided, I am ready to pay this price for standing for truth no matter what. And we need to pass these on to our children as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was actually reading First John right now. I'm studying First, Second, and Third John. And I noticed yesterday where John is saying, like, the darkness hates the light. The world hates the things of God. And I'm like, yeah, we have to remember that. Like, you're not going to find a middle ground, a neutral ground with what we're even experiencing today. And then I saw over the weekend, because I think the last Saturday of June was Pride Day around the nation. And I'm just like, and people had shirts on, "Not today, Jesus." And it's really, and there was another one basically about Christianity, but the complete reverse, where you say, "Not today, Satan," or "I'm going to walk in the light today," or whatever. It was the complete contrast. And Christianity, I was thinking this morning, I was at the gym earlier today, and I was like, Christianity, the ideas and the morality of Christianity is really, really conflicting. Like, there is a head-on collision right now with immorality and morality, which morality is grounded in God. So of course Christians are going to get that, they're going to get that pushback, but it's not just pushback. It's being called out. How dare these Christians not be loving, using all those virtue words. And I like this thing that you had said about ignorance. You said ignorance is not innocence. And sometimes I want you to expand on that, because I was thinking, okay, ignorance means not knowing, but sometimes you can put yourself in a place of ignorance too, to say, well, if I don't really know what's going on in the culture, I don't have to speak to it. So I'll just stay out of it. And so that
Yeah.
can be another way you choose ignorance. So can you tell me what you mean when you say ignorance is not innocence?
Yeah. Well, I think when people hear that I'm a homeschool mom, they think we live in this bubble of of ignorance, and or that is how we're trying to raise our children. And it's maybe, as a young mom, I may have thought that, like, I'm going to protect my kids and they're never going to, experience the the darkness outside, and when they're teeny tiny, that's okay. But I talked about this with Lori Morrow and Amy Davison on our Voices of WIA interview. um, I like to call it more of a greenhouse versus a bubble. And so, when when your kids are small and young and innocent, and um, don't have the discernment yet to handle all of the onslaught of culture, right? We keep them in kind of like little saplings. Like, we don't put our little plants out into the storms of life and just say good luck, right? We nurture them, we feed them, we encourage them, and allow them to grow some roots. And then slowly we put them out and let the wind bend them a little bit, and then bring them back in and nurture them and feed them, and then put them out longer, as they grow deeper roots, and as they kind of exercise discernment and good choices within the boundaries that you give them. And that's kind of how I view our homeschool. Is we are more of a greenhouse where we can we're not completely protecting them from the elements, but we are maybe moderating the onslaught that comes with being a Christian in the world. And we leave them out longer and longer and longer until they're able to stand on their own, and exercise that discernment and strength of character. And so that's kind of how I view how any parent should parent, whether their kid is being homeschooled or in the public school, right? We feed them, we nurture them, and we monitor kind of the cultural influences, because it's unavoidable. It's in our TV shows, it's in our books, it's in their friends next door that you're trying to be a light to. And so we shouldn't be hiding in caves, never interacting. We're to be in the world, and making disciples and spreading the good news of the gospel, because it's a dying and broken world whom they need Christ. And that's our role as Christians. And so we call it willful ignorance in this house. Like, we don't allow willful ignorance in this house. We need to be well informed, but we also need the truth as well before they kind of just get clobbered by cultural expectations. And so that's kind of how we approach parenting in a way, with our homeschool and personally.
Yeah. Don't you think too that Christians should, we should be, obviously we have to have an approach, right? Not to be, my goal shouldn't be, I want to be right in this. It should be to speak the truth, because it's transforming. The truth will transform. Jesus said it, the truth will set you free.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like Christians should be like, let's tackle this issue. Let's have conversations. They always say in apologetics, we hear that marketplace of ideas. It's like, where's that city center? Let's all go down there, and where all the busyness and is happening, and where everybody's congregating, and let's put ourselves into that ring and throw in the fact that we know we have an answer. We have the truth. And it's almost like we should have an eagerness to tackle these things. We should have a confidence that gives us that eagerness to say, hey, I'm ready to talk about this and why this isn't the truth. And I feel like so many Christians, going back to what we had originally said, try to find a neutral ground where everybody's happy.
Yeah.
And like, let's just keep the peace here. And you're not going to keep the peace with it. I was listening again today about even the progression since you have the White House lighting up rainbow, I think in 2012 or 2013, can't quite remember, was under Obama. And the Supreme Court, I think it was Obergefell, was, they won, and now marriage for all homosexuals and things like that. And the promise was, this is just for us to have our rights. We just want to get married too. We just want to be on insurance. We just want to cohabitate and all this. But here we are in 2013, and it's not true. There's always going to be a progression. Like you said, you're always advancing the kingdom of darkness, or you're advancing God's kingdom. And the truth is only going to advance the kingdom of God. And so I just find it to be like, you said it, willful ignorance is where I think we think that's the safe zone. And then in the midst of the storm, we find ourselves without the supplies and the tools and the strategies and everything else that we need because we weren't prepared. So those are just like, to me, those are the things that as Christians, to just check ourselves and think, man, am I confident in the truth? Am I eager to speak that truth? Or am I looking for that neutral ground? Like, let me just stand right there and not sway to the right or to the left, because if I just stay in the neutral ground, everybody will be appeased. It just doesn't work that way,
And they won't, because they're not neutral. No,
There you go.
they're pushing for you to celebrate their ideas, their lifestyles. And so you either have to completely celebrate them, or they're going to push back anyway. So you can't just say, well, I don't have an opinion on that. They want you to have an opinion. Now they want your opinion to be their opinion, but even the world will not allow you to remain neutral any longer. You have to pick a side.
Yes, that's a great point. I think whereas maybe we could have flown under the radar in a nation, for our country, the America, in a nation that still had and still clung to some Judeo-Christian values, where we could see them still integrated into the culture, we could fly under the radar and have okay, I really don't need to get involved because there's nothing really happening where I have to stand. I mean, I don't think there's ever been a time in culture where we can just fly under the radar. That's not what I'm saying, but I think sometimes it may be easier to do that. Whereas now there are a lot of things in culture are in a black and white category that are so defined and so distinct that there's no more, like there's no neutral ground with it.
Yeah.
I mean, I never thought we would be here with just, being a mom. My youngest is 13 years ago. I never thought we'd be discussing the things that he has to face as in, the culture he's growing up in.
Yeah. It's been exponential for sure. It kind of, even 5 years ago, we weren't having these conversations. And it's just going to, speed up as we go, I think. And in order to stand for the truth, you have to know the truth. And in order for our kids to stand for the truth, they have to know the truth. They have to be trained and equipped. The Bible uses military, terminology frequently. And we have to have that mindset, because it's a spiritual battle that's won on our knees and in the Word through the Spirit. And our faith is not going to save our kids. And so they have to be equipped and they have to be trained and, shown how to be biblically literate. And so they know for themselves what the truth is, not just what their parents believe the truth to be. So it's an active role. We can no longer be passive in anything. It's so important, though.
Yes, 100%. I agree. So you have another awesome quote that I shared last week too, by the way. Yes, I share Kelly's quotes. It says, the world demands that we bow to every other God but our own. And I was like, that is so true.
Yeah.
So let's just talk about what are some of the gods of the world and how some Christians um, are bowing to these gods in compromise, I guess, or how do we bow to them in compromise? And what
Yeah.
does not, what does it look like to not bow practically lived out like every day?
Yeah. So I think especially with the rise of social media, just being loved by the world, right? Being liked, being popular, fitting in, I think is the biggest. And we as adults struggle with that as well. It's not just a young people thing.
Mhm.
You can tell by the research done on phone addiction. But it's so many people care more about the opinion of people on the internet, strangers on the internet, than they do about the holy God that has rescued them and redeemed them. And it's you know, we as Christians as who live out the biblical worldview, we will not well, we won't fit in. And we have to be okay with that, and we have to expect that. Um, the Apostle Paul, I think, says it really well when he says to live as Christ and to die as gain. And we have to take that seriously, for ourselves. And it's one of those kind of tricky things because it's hard not to be liked, and it's uncomfortable. It's hard to kind of be the outsider. From most of society, the biblical world, people who actually hold a biblical worldview, I think Barna says it's like 6% or something, just
Mhm.
insanely small. It's that means over 90% of people are not going to share your ideas, even within the church. And so we have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, and we have to remember that eternity is at stake, and our holy God, who we are going to spend eternity with, his opinion, his standards matter more. We have to believe the word of God more than we believe anything else if we're going to endure. And again, we have to know the word of God more than we know anything else if we're going to endure as well. And so I think that is important because we see this kind of hijacking of biblical language today, love and tolerance and acceptance, and even the hijacking of the person of Christ, right? Everybody wants Christ on their team. If he's on their team, they kind of they win the game. And so we see this kind of distortion of his sayings. We see a distortion of his character in order to fit with their worldviews. And so we have to know the biblical definition of love. We have to know the biblical definition of acceptance and tolerance, and just our identity in Christ, and not what the world tells us our identity is. And we have to be I recently read a book and it was really good. It was let's see if I remember the title, but like when people are big and God is small. And it talks about the fear of the Lord versus the fear of men. And I thought it was so good because it shows you through different ways, like the things you're actually clinging to in this world, the temporal idols, and how that affects your life and how you live your life out, when we should be clinging to God, and we should fear him and his holiness more than we fear what the world can and will do to us as we stand for the truth. It's hard work, but it's always going to be worth it because he's worth it.
Yes. Yeah. I think idols are anything that we try to please. Like if you just, like you were saying, if we try to please or get the acceptance of anyone other than God, then we've made those things priority over him. And then we're going to start compromising the truth and compromising God's standards, and it's going to pull us away from him. So, I mean, we could sit here and name anything can become an idol. So to name all of them off, like, we could be here forever, right? Like even our education, like trying to get better at the knowledge that we have, even if it's something good, like in apologetics or something, can become an idol, because it will, if it replaces the priority where God is in our lives. But I think I have to ask myself every day, why do I even do this? Why am I doing this podcast? Why am I putting stuff on YouTube? Why am I writing curriculum and things? Why am I doing it? Like, am I doing it because I want to put myself out there, or am I doing it because I want to put God's truth out there? And that is sometimes like a heart check. And then sometimes it's easy. And then sometimes it's hard. I think you can be all over the place. And I don't want people to think that I have it all figured out, because I don't. I think I know where God has to be. And like you said, every day, that's something where I'm like, if I don't do anything, if I might have a 1,000 things like planned, the gym, a podcast episode, writing curriculum, whatever it may be, posting on social media. But if I don't read my Bible today and spend time with the Lord today, then why does it matter? None of that even matters. It has what significance is it? Like, it has to be for God and for his glory, or I'm doing it in vain. And then that thing has become, it's replaced the Lord. And I think it can be simple like that. What are we trying to please? And sometimes that could even be ourselves, you know? And so I think that that's just, again, it's just an evaluation question, like evaluating yourself, your heart, and taking it before God. And that's why I love that God can handle our honesty too. Like, God, I'm really struggling with the fact that, you know, I've posted something on Instagram and I don't feel adequate. I don't feel like it. And even then, even in my insecurity, that I've realized I'm making it about me. Because it should be like, if it's the truth and if it honors God, send it on its way and walk away from it. Because it doesn't matter who likes it and who doesn't. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean? So there's a bunch of little things that we can argue with ourselves over, as long as God helps us pull it back and say, be Lord of my life, you know, and not these other things. Because the pull of the world and the sway of the world, it's real.
It is. It's a strong current.
Yes. I like how you put that. And then we have to swim upstream, which makes it hard, intentional, you know, and knowing the direction that we're headed is not the easiest direction. We could make it easy on ourselves.
It's easy to drift, right? It's easy to drift with the current. Trevin Wax, in his book, The Thrill of Orthodoxy, talks about this as kind of like a current. And he says, you know, you can just be drifting along, kind of minding your own business. And then you look back at the shore and you realize, I am so far from my starting point. How on earth did I get here? And so it takes, you know, discipline and diligence in opposing the drift of compromise. It is hard work. Like I said, we can't be passive Christians. We have to be on the active. We have to be pursuing Christ actively every day of our lives, whether we feel like it or not. This is where, you know, and as a former athlete, and as yourself who goes and does very challenging workouts with CrossFit, you know, there comes a time where motivation is no longer there, and you rely on your discipline. And that's why spiritual disciplines are even more important than physical discipline.
Yes.
Because that motivation isn't always going to be there. We aren't always going to feel like, you know, studying the word. We aren't always going to feel like praying for things when life is hard, or even when life is easy. I think it's almost harder when life is easy. But this is why we have to become diligent, focused Christians. And I think the Western church has kind of, you know, drifted into the ditch of, well, that's legalism. But it's not. It's just faithfulness. And so we have to be active Christians.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because you're so right. Like, do you have to read your Bible every day to be a Christian? No. Should you read your Bible every day as a Christian? Yes. Now, God understands when, like I had my babies and I'm holed up in the hospital and I'm just
Right.
like, like, oh my gosh, if
Right.
I don't read the Bible today, you know what I mean? Like
Right.
there are circumstances, but that's where people like, I've been saying this lately, like the pendulum swings wide.
Hmm.
And it's like, sometimes it's an all or nothing with us as humans because we have a hard time
Yeah.
balancing things out. But you're so right. Like Jesus calls it daily bread for a reason.
Yeah.
It's daily bread. And the thing is like, yeah, there are times when we purposely take time away from physical, like the food that we nourish our physical bodies with for days if you fast, like the discipline of fasting.
Mhm.
But you're not going to just be like, yeah, I'm not going to eat today, like for some no reason, just like I'm too
Right.
busy to stop and eat. I mean,
Hmm.
I rarely hear that. And I think that that's the same equivalent to say, if we just passively say, I'm not going to read and sit down with the Lord and pray and have that time. If we wouldn't do it with our meals throughout the day for no reason, or just because we got so busy, why would we do it with the Lord? And I think a lot of times those things in the spiritual parallel the physical or vice versa.
Yeah.
But it's so right. Like the church will be like, well, that's legalism. If you're suggesting to people that they read their Bibles on a daily basis, um, that's legalism. It's not. It's only legalism if you say that's your religion or your salvation depends on it.
Right.
And
Yes.
no one's saying that,
No. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that. I like that a
Yeah.
lot.
And we
So
live in a world where like technology, I mean, on when I'm in the hospital or suffering, in a dark room, I listen to the word, right? There's
yeah,
wonderful apps and there's a lot of tools that kind of remove the excuses of not feasting on his word. And so if there's a will, there's a way a lot of times. Um, so there's options for you.
yes, very good point. I was actually scripting or recording the episode that will come out. It'll come out before this on Bible translations and Bible versions and things.
Hmm.
And in English, we have over like 100
Yeah.
different versions and translations of the Bible. And some languages there are some out there that haven't been translated into specific languages. We're very blessed. There's a buffet of Bibles
Yes.
for people who
Yeah.
speak English. And I don't want to take that for granted.
Right. Yeah.
So I want people to know, full disclosure from me, like I told you this, Kelly, when I emailed you, I love the truth. And I get messages from people that be like, oh, wow, you really tackle these hard issues. They're very controversial and you speak the truth. And sometimes I think saying a male is not hard truth. It's controversial right now because the culture's out of their minds. But as far as it being like, I don't know that Paul, Peter, John, I don't know, fast forward to hundreds of years later, Christians in like the 17th century would have been like, wow, Shando, you're really killing it over there, speaking the hard truth for Jesus. If you're saying a man is a man, a
Right.
biological male is a male. But that's where we are today. And so when I get those messages, I'm like, okay, like I'm thankful that people encourage you because there are obviously, like we said, there are some people trying to find neutral ground on some of these things. I'm
Yeah.
so thankful for the encouragement. I don't want to make it sound like I'm not, but it's funny that of what is considered a hard truth today
Sure.
compared to what the disciples died over, um so but it doesn't mean I don't get intimidated either to share those easy simple truths is what I call them.
Yeah.
um I don't want people to think like, wow, just because, I mean, I always say this, I'm sitting behind this mic right now. I'm not on a street corner somewhere. I'm not going into other countries where Christianity is forbidden. This is pretty safe.
Yeah.
I'm not doing anything like heroic here. I'm not. Let's be honest. This is about the easiest thing you can do as a Christian is sit behind a microphone, and but it doesn't mean I don't get intimidated at times because, like you said, the pressure is on and it's getting amped up and I don't know where this is all going to lead. And that sometimes when you sit back and you think about it, all you can say is, Lord, no matter what, I want to stand at my post. And if this is my post for now, this microphone is the opportunity that I have. Help me to be faithful with it. and speak the truth. But do times of intimidation and shouts from the world to like, shut up, you bigot, and all those things intimidate me and make me want to question or back down? Yeah. Like you said, there's rough waters on the horizon. So how do we fix our minds and remain steadfast right now? And are there practical tips to do that? I mean, I guess we've said one of them is like being in the word and knowing your word and creating that spiritual discipline, which is something that takes a practice. I mean, even the word practice in 1 John chapter 2, gosh, I loved it, because when I read it, it said you can practice righteousness and you can practice lawlessness, which is sin. And then when you look up the word practice, practice means the thing that you do often to become more proficient in that thing. And you as an athlete know that practice is crucial to getting better at the thing that you're trying to master. Well, we can practice and we can master lawlessness or sin, and we can not master righteousness. I don't want to say that, but we can practice righteousness and get better towards progressing as walking as Christ did. So the word practice is in the Bible, and it means something you do repeatedly. So you can create that spiritual discipline. That's a practical thing. But what else would you suggest to help Christians decide now, right now in this easy moment, to stand for the truth?
Yeah. So I have an acronym for you.
I love acronyms.
And it's so I talk a lot about suffering well as a Christian. I've learned that through my own personal suffering. And I feel like any kind of practiced discipline, like the practice of suffering, lends itself to other kinds of suffering, lends itself to other kinds of pain. And so, because I think suffering well as a Christian is actually a lost spiritual discipline in the church. It is, and you know, if we as individuals don't suffer well, and the Big C church doesn't learn to suffer well, we're not going to stand against the onslaught that's coming. And so, the acronym to suffer well is the word trust, TRUST. And so the first one I have is you need to train and teach yourself and your family what the biblical worldview says about life. I think that a lot of people maybe teach from a biblical worldview, but they don't teach what a biblical worldview is. And that's actually what I'm going to be doing at Women in Apologetics. We're creating some courses, and I'm going to do the worldview course. But so train or teach yourself and your family what a biblical worldview says about life. And then the R is read and study the stories of heroes of the Christian faith. And I talk about this a little bit in my breakout at WIA, but the men and women of faith that have gone before us are an incredible encouragement to our own personal faith. You know, the martyrs and those who actually suffered hard and well. You know, we see this kind of joyfulness in them, even in their suffering, as they're being persecuted, as they're being attacked, as they're dying. And it's such a beautiful testimony to the people who came to watch them die, to even their executioners. You know, I think of like Perpetua, and her executioner wanted to grant her mercy in a quick death because he was so inspired by her faith and her unwavering truth. And she said to him, no, like, make it painful so I can identify more with Christ as I die, which is just an amazing testimony. And when we read these stories, I think that really bolsters our own faith. And then we study, you know, Christ, who is the perfect suffering servant, right? He suffered so well. They brutally beat him. They nailed him to a cross. They insulted him. And yet he prayed, Father, forgive them. This is the ultimate model that we should try to emulate in our own suffering. And then U for trust, TRU, is understand that there is suffering in this life, but we keep our focus on eternity. when Christ was suffering, it said it was the joy set before him and the outcome he knew it would produce that he willingly went to the cross. And that's how we look at suffering as in our own life, right? We don't rejoice in the suffering but for suffering's sake. We rejoice because we know it produces endurance to our faith. And we know that a race run well is the ultimate goal of our faith, to spend eternity in his presence. And then number 4, S, is study God's truth and character through his word and hide it deep in your heart. Just last night, my daughter, I was showing her how to look up a verse in the concordance. And she goes, but how did you know that word to look up? And I said, oh, well, it's like, because I have it hidden in my heart. I have it memorized. I know the truth is deep in my heart. So the Holy Spirit brings it to my remembrance when I need it. And she, kind of gallivanted off, very encouraged. And then the last one is T, testimony. Live your life as a testimony and a reflection as an image bearer. So we're to reflect Christ in all that we do. We're his ambassadors here on this earth. And we represent the holy, righteous, living God. And anything apart from that is not his reflection. Just as an ambassador to another country represents the country he's from, and all of his actions reflect directly back onto that country that he's from, we're ambassadors of the kingdom of God. And so every action and word that we have in our lives reflect directly back onto Christ. And we want to be a good image bearer for that. So that's my little acronym on how to suffer well. And I hope that that's helpful.
No, I love that. I acronyms are a great teaching tool and helps you memorize it. But at the same time, it's like you have lived this and you've learned this through experience. And I think that brings a greater quality and value to it. I mean, I'm not saying that these, a lot of what you said, we could find these suggestions and examples in the word. Obviously, you're pointing us back to them, but you've learned that this is what you have to do just as through your suffering. And one of my friends that I know who lost her son a few years ago, she talks often about how to suffer well. And I just told our small group last night, like when she asked that question, do you suffer well? It convicts me because I mean, I can stub my toe and be like, oh my gosh, like, you know what I mean? Like, or if something doesn't go your way, or it's just like, I feel so spoiled in a sense because what can you handle if it's so hot outside? I remember on vacation a couple weeks ago, it was really hot and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so hot out here. And I caught myself, I'm like, you're on vacation at a beach and you just complained about the heat. Like there are people who can't do that. And I think that's such a terrible example I just gave on suffering because it's not suffering at all. And I think that's my point. If I'm going to complain about being on vacation and being hot, how would you suffer in a real situation where you're enduring pain and things like that from a situation that you didn't put yourself in? So I think that these are great, just a great thing. And I'll put these in the show notes too, so people can see them and go back to them and pull them up if they want to. So what is Women in Apologetics doing lately? Like what are you guys working on? What's coming down the line?
Yeah. So as we said, we just had our annual conference out in California. And I think there were like 38 countries watching or something.
Wow.
It was just amazing. I know we had a whole army base in Germany of women watching. It was just such a neat experience. So cool. And the Ministry of Women in Apologetics is such an incredible ministry. I know I'm really new to their organization, but I got to peek behind the curtain, so to speak. And I could not have been more inspired and impressed by the women that run it and volunteer for it. Their heart is for the world and for God. And it's a beautiful thing to be a part of. I'm so grateful that they invited me to come alongside them. And they're like tirelessly working on all kinds of resources. Sign up for their emails so you can get like alerts of all the things we're working on. But currently, we are furiously working on 3 short courses. for women. We have an Islam course already available. I highly recommend it. Laura Powell does that. She's our resident Islam specialist. But currently we're working on short courses that are going to be very short, like 3 to 5 videos long, on truth, logic, and then worldviews. And so be on the lookout for those. We're in the middle of writing them and producing them, and then we will announce when they come out soon, hopefully. But just kind of the foundations to getting started in apologetics, getting started to be just a critical thinker about the faith, and how you kind of navigate these waters that we've talked about. So I think that's kind of the biggest project we're in the middle of. And like I said, I'm just really grateful to be a part of it.
Yes, that's awesome. They're Women in Apologetics is great. Laura Powell was on my podcast. I think she's been on 3 times. Yes, she's been on 3 times.
Yeah.
And she actually, we were talking by email the other day, to be exact. So she was asking me if I knew of any venues coming up for like your guys' next conferences. So I was like, I'll be on the lookout for you. But where can we find and follow you for people who are like, oh, I want to get connected with Kelli?
Yeah, sure. I am on Instagram at apologetically female. And then I have a blog and I post on YouTube every once in a while. And if I do, I put it on my Instagram. So that's kind of the catch-all for my thing. I'm trying to get more active on it.
Yeah.
But that's the easiest way to find me.
Okay. Well, I'll make sure I put all the links in the show notes. If you guys have any questions for Kelli, you can connect with her. You can email her. You can find all of her information, like I said, in the show notes. If you have any questions for me, you can email me at hello@shandafulbright.com, and I'll catch you on the next one.